The sky above the Black Sea was deceptively calm, painted in shades of blue and gold as the sun dipped lower on the horizon. But beneath that stillness, tension crackled like static. U.S. reconnaissance aircraft patrolled cautiously, while Russian drones prowled the skies with increasing boldness. What no one expected was the reckless move that would soon ignite headlines across the globe. On that day, a Russian combat drone locked onto an American F-35 Lightning II, one of the most advanced stealth fighters in the world. The drone, smaller, faster, and packed with explosives, did the unthinkable. It surged forward, closing the distance with terrifying speed before slamming into the American jet in a blinding fireball. In an instant, the tranquil sky erupted into chaos. A shockwave rippled outward, scattering debris across the airspace. Sensors on U.S. Navy ships stationed nearby lit up with red alerts, tracking every fragment of wreckage. Flare alarms blared across control rooms. Pilots in surrounding squadrons scrambled to react, their voices sharp over encrypted radio channels. "We have a collision, possible hostile action." The world's most advanced warplane, struck by a drone that cost a fraction of its price, spun violently as its systems screamed warnings. For a moment, it looked as though the F-35 was finished. But then, against all odds, the pilot managed to stabilize. Flames licked the wings, smoke trailed behind. Yet the stealth fighter clawed its way back into the fight. U.S. commanders were stunned, but they knew this was only the beginning. Because what came next wasn't just about one drone or one jet, it was about what the collision meant. Was this a deliberate Russian provocation, a test of American resolve, or a reckless accident that could spiral into a war no one wanted? At sea, the U.S. Navy's destroyers immediately repositioned, missile tubes ready, radars sweeping every corner of the sky. Russian warships, shadowing the American fleet, shifted formation as if anticipating retaliation. The Black Sea suddenly felt smaller, more dangerous, and every second brought the world closer to an escalation. The pilot of the damaged F-35 now faced a choice: eject and risk capture in hostile waters, or stay with the aircraft, attempt to maneuver back toward the fleet, and buy precious time for the Navy to assess its next move. Back in Washington and Moscow, intelligence agencies scrambled. Real-time footage from drones, satellites, and radar feeds poured into command centers. Analysts leaned over glowing screens, trying to piece together what had just happened. And in both capitals, leaders were faced with the same question: respond with force or hold back and risk appearing weak. But here's where the story takes an even more shocking turn. Because while the world's attention was locked on the crippled F-35, another element entered the sky, one that no one had anticipated. Emerging from high-altitude clouds, radar signatures faint and nearly undetectable, several U.S. Beta Spirit stealth bombers revealed themselves. They had been orbiting silently, cloaked by advanced stealth technology, waiting for the exact moment to make their presence known. Now, their silhouettes cut across the fading sunlight, signaling that the United States had far more in play than Russia realized. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't just about defending one fighter jet, this was about showing overwhelming force. On the Russian side, command centers erupted with activity. Satellite feeds confirmed what their operators feared: America had deployed strategic bombers into the contested airspace. And if those bombers were armed, they weren't carrying just missiles. They were carrying payloads capable of rewriting the balance of power in minutes. Meanwhile, the battered F-35 continued to fight gravity, its pilot wrestling with controls, alarms screaming in his ears. He knew the stakes. If he went down in these waters, rescue would be nearly impossible without a direct confrontation with Russian naval units already prowling nearby. His comms crackled. "Hold on, we're coming for you." U.S. Navy helicopters were already lifting off from carriers, escorted by squadrons of F/A-18 Super Hornets. Then came the next escalation. Russian drones, dozens of them launched from coastal installations, rising into the sky like a swarm of hornets. Unlike the single drone that ran the F-35, These were coordinated, networked, and deadly. Their path was clear: overwhelm the American aircraft and force a retreat. But what they didn't expect was the wall of electronic warfare that awaited them. From deep within the fleet, a U.S. destroyer activated its SLQ-3 electronic countermeasure suite. In an instant, half the swarm's signals went dark, their guidance systems scrambled, some drones spinning out of control and plunging into the sea. The battlefield had shifted from missiles and firepower to invisible waves of cyber warfare. It was a high-tech duel, and the outcome would determine who controlled the skies over the Black Sea. And just as the US seemed to gain the upper hand, Russian Su-57 stealth fighters appeared on radar, moving fast, armed, and flying straight toward the crippled F-35 and its escorts. The collision that started as a single, shocking incident was now snowballing into a direct standoff between two of the world's most powerful militaries. But the real question remained: who would fire the first official shot? The Russian Su-57s sliced through the upper atmosphere with menacing precision, their afterburners glowing like blue flames against the fading horizon. Each jet carried long-range air-to-air missiles, designed specifically to hunt down American stealth fighters. Their approach vector wasn't random, it was locked onto the damaged F-35, as if Moscow wanted to finish what the drone had started. The US response was immediate. Two F-A-18 Super Hornets broke formation and raced upward, cutting across the sky to intercept. Behind them, the orbiting beta bombers adjusted course ever so slightly, their bomb bays armed but still sealed, a silent warning of what could come as the standoff turned kinetic. In the command center aboard the USS Roosevelt, the tactical screens glowed red with overlapping signatures. Operators tracked the incoming Russian fighters, while analysts fed options to commanders. Every voice was calm, but the weight of the moment pressed heavy. One miscalculated move, one trigger pulled too soon, and the Black Sea would ignite into a war zone. Meanwhile, the pilot of the crippled F-35 was fighting not only his damaged aircraft, but also time itself. His oxygen supply was dipping dangerously low, and the heat from the earlier collision had warped sections of the fuselage. He pushed his jet toward the US fleet, smoke trailing in his wake like a beacon for everyone watching. Then the skies lit up. From the Russian side, two of the Su-57s dropped into attack posture, their radars painting the American fighters. The Hornets locked on, their AIM-120 arms armed and ready. The tension was unbearable. If they fired, it would be the first official exchange, and a clash that could spiral out of control. And yet, just as the order was about to be considered, a new alert rippled across the fleet. Multiple unidentified vessels had broken formation on the Russian side, charging toward the American destroyers at high speed. This wasn't just an air confrontation anymore. The ocean itself was becoming a battlefield. And as both sides surged closer, the line between deterrence and outright war grew thinner by the second. The unidentified vessels surged forward across the Black Sea, their wake slicing through the water at alarming speed. On US tactical screens, they appeared as a cluster of fast attack craft, armed with anti-ship missiles and torpedoes. Russian commanders weren't holding back. They were signaling that, if the air battle didn't force the Americans out, their navy would. On board the USS Roosevelt, klaxons wailed. The captain issued the order: all batteries ready, defensive posture only. No first strike unless fired upon. Every sailor knew what that meant: hold steady under maximum threat, but be prepared to unleash devastating firepower the second a hostile launch was detected. Meanwhile, deep beneath the surface, US submarines prowled silently. Their presence hadn't been revealed yet, but the Russian fleet had to suspect. Virginia-class submarines, armed with Tomahawk missiles, were already in firing positions. The balance of power was shifting like tectonic plates, quiet, unseen, but potentially catastrophic. Above the waves, the Russian Su-57s tightened formation, diving closer toward the F-35 and its escorts. One of the stealth fighters abruptly broke away, accelerating downward directly toward the U.S. carrier group. The maneuver set off alarms across every American vessel in the area. Was it an intimidation tactic, or the opening move of an attack run? The Hornets shadowed the Russians, missile locks flashing inside their HUDs, but still no one fired. The air was heavy with a silence more dangerous than gunfire, each side daring the other to take that irreversible step. Suddenly another twist. The fast attack craft weren't alone. Radar pings confirmed a larger signature behind them, moving slower but radiating immense power. A Russian Slava-class cruiser, bristling with long-range missiles, was closing in. Its weapon systems lit up like a Christmas tree on U.S. screens. From the carrier's deck, crews scrambled to ready interceptors and defensive countermeasures. The Phalanx CIWS guns rotated toward the horizon, their barrels humming. Missile tubes were uncovered. The fleet was on a hair trigger, and then across encrypted comms, an urgent warning echoed, Russian missile locks detected. Multiple targeting systems engaged. The moment everyone feared had arrived. The question now was simple: who would pull the trigger first? Every ship in the U.S. carrier strike group held its breath as the electronic signature of Russian missile locks grew stronger. Dozens of targeting beams painted the Roosevelt and its escorting destroyers. Sailors on deck could feel it in their bones, the invisible weight of being in the crosshairs. The Roosevelt's Combat Information Center came alive with a storm of voices. Multiple locks confirmed, 20+ incoming vectors. Slava-class cruiser is powering weapons. The admiral's voice cut through the noise. Maintain discipline. They fire, we finish this. At that exact moment, the B-2 bombers circling high above adjusted altitude. Their silhouettes disappeared once more into the upper cloud layer, stealth cloaking them almost entirely. They were still in the fight, unseen and unspoken, waiting for the kill order. The Russians knew it. The knowledge hung over the battlefield like a storm cloud. Suddenly, a flash erupted on the sea's horizon. One of the Russian fast attack craft fired a missile low, fast, and skimming just above the waves. Sirens blared across the Roosevelt. Inbound, inbound, engage. Within seconds, a U.S. Arleigh-Burke-class destroyer rotated its vertical launch system and let loose an interceptor. A Standard Missile 6 screamed into the sky, locking onto the hostile projectile. The collision lit the horizon in a fiery blossom, fragments raining into the sea. The line had been crossed. In response, more Russian vessels began arming their tubes, preparing for a saturation strike. The U.S. fleet braced. Phalanx CIWS guns whirred into motion, their barrels tracking invisible threats, ready to spit 1,000 rounds per second. Above, the Su-57s broke formation. One swept across the carrier's perimeter at supersonic speed, while another climbed high, its contrails cutting the air like a blade. The Hornets moved to intercept, locking weapons, pushing engines to the red. The crippled F-35, trailing smoke but still alive, veered toward the fleet under the protection of its escorts, every second of its flight a desperate race against both gravity and enemy fire. And then the Black Sea roared again. Dozens of Russian drones burst onto the battlefield, streaking low across the water in a swarm. The Americans countered instantly. From the decks of U.S. destroyers, serum launchers lit up, spitting guided interceptors that tore the drones out of the sky in rapid succession. Explosions rolled like thunder, the air thick with fire and shrapnel. The escalation was no longer subtle. It was a battlefield on the edge of erupting into total chaos. And both sides knew. One wrong move now wouldn't just mean losses. At sea it could ignite something far greater than anyone dared imagine. The sea was alive with chaos interceptors streaking across the sky. Drones exploding mid-air, waves churning from missile impacts. Yet despite the storm, both sides hesitated to unleash their full arsenals. It was a deadly dance, each maneuver meant to test the other's nerve without igniting all-out war. On board the Russian cruiser, crews scrambled across the deck, its commanders barked rapid orders. Its radar dishes spun violently, locking onto multiple American ships simultaneously. The Slava-class vessel had firepower capable of leveling a small fleet, and the Americans knew it. But they also knew something else: the beta bombers above were still unseen. And if the Russians made one wrong move, their flagship could be vaporized in minutes. In the Roosevelt's command center, the tension was suffocating. "Admiral, they're preparing another launch. Recommend preemptive strike." The admiral's reply was steady, almost cold. "Negative. Defensive posture only. Make them commit." It wasn't just about winning, it was about showing restraint while standing toe-to-toe with a nuclear power. Meanwhile, the Hornets danced with the Su-57s above. Lock after lock lit up the pilots' HUDs, each warning tone shrieking in their helmets. The Russian stealth fighters darted in and out of radar, diving low then climbing high, pushing the Americans to react, but never firing the first shot. It was aerial chess at Mach speeds. And through it all, the battered F-35 clawed its way back toward the carrier group. Its pilot's breathing was ragged, his oxygen low, warning systems still flashing. Yet every mile closer to the Roosevelt meant hope. If he could just make it within range, he might survive this encounter that had spiraled into an international flashpoint. But the Black Sea wasn't done escalating. A sonar operator's voice suddenly cracked through the comms. Multiple subsurface contacts detected bearing northeast, closing fast. The words sent a shiver through the Roosevelt's CIC. Russian submarines. Silent predators lurking beneath the waves, moving into kill positions. The US Navy had its own hunters below the surface, but no one knew who would strike first. Above, the sky was electric with fighter jets and drones. On the surface, warships bristled with weapons. And now, beneath the waves, submarines circled like sharks in the deep. 3 dimensions of warfare: air, sea, and undersea were converging into one. The battlefield had become a powder keg, and everyone knew it. All it would take was a single spark to set the entire Black Sea on fire. The sonar pings echoed like ghostly heartbeats across the Roosevelt's CIC. Submarines, several of them, were threading their way through the black waters below. Their signatures were faint, deliberately masked, but unmistakable: Russian hunter-killers. The crew fell silent, everyone understanding the danger. In the depths of the Black Sea, the battle was already underway. A US Virginia-class submarine crept silently along the thermocline, its sensors tuned to the faintest trace of cavitation. Its captain gave quiet orders, his voice steady in the suffocating silence of the deep. "Maintain acoustic shadow. Weapons ready, but hold fire." The submarine's tubes were already loaded with heavyweight torpedoes, lethal, quiet, and waiting. Above, the storm of tension continued. Su-57s slashed across the sky, their sleek forms leaving contrails that tangled with the vapor trails of American Hornets. Drones buzzed like angry hornets themselves, darting between fighter formations, trying to probe weak spots in the US defensive screen. And at the center of it all, the F-35 struggled on, its engine coughing black smoke into the sky, its pilot praying the aircraft would hold together long enough to reach the carrier group. Every second of its tortured flight drew the eyes of both sides: America desperate to save one of its own, Russia determined to show it could deny that rescue. On the surface, Russian fast attack craft pressed forward aggressively, darting in and out of missile range like wolves circling prey. The Slava-class cruiser loomed behind them, its missile hatches open, the threat of a saturation strike hanging in the balance. The US destroyers tracked every movement, missile tubes locked, guns angled, interceptors armed. And then, the undersea tension snapped. A Russian submarine released a torpedo, silent, deadly, slicing through the water in the direction of the American fleet. For a few seconds, no one on the surface even knew. But in the dark belly of a Virginia-class sub, the torpedo's acoustic signature lit up the display. The American commander didn't hesitate. "Countermeasures deploy. Prepare to return fire." Moments later, the Roosevelt's sonar operators confirmed it, torpedo in the water. Closing fast, the fleet erupted into action, Decoys were launched, ships turned hard, and helicopters scrambled from the carrier deck, dipping their sonar buoys into the sea to locate the attacker. But beneath the waves, the Americans weren't just defending, they were hunting. The Virginia-class submarine angled toward the incoming threat, its tubes opening, ready to launch a retaliatory strike. Now, the Black Sea wasn't just a contested zone. It was a battlefield where missiles, torpedoes, and fighter jets all converged, each domain pushing closer and closer to the moment of no return. And above it all, the unseen beta bombers circled, silent, waiting for the order that could change everything in an instant. The Black Sea churned with invisible violence. The Russian torpedo cut through the depths like a steel predator, leaving a trail of bubbles in its wake. Above, the US fleet was already maneuvering hard, each destroyer adjusting its course to throw off the weapons lock. The ocean heaved with white wakes as the massive warships accelerated, their hulls groaning under the stress of sudden evasive maneuvers. Inside the Virginia-class submarine, red lights bathed the control room. The sonar operator's voice was sharp, torpedo closing 300 meters. 250, the captain gave the command. A countermeasure was launched, a cylindrical decoy designed to mimic the sound of the Roosevelt's massive engines. It sank into the black water, releasing a cacophony of false echoes. The Russian torpedo hesitated, its sensors flickered between targets, struggling to choose. For a split second, hope surged through the American crew, but then, as if guided by instinct, the weapon veered back on course toward the US destroyer nearest the formation. On the surface, sailors rushed to battle stations as alarms shrieked across the deck. Incoming torpedo, brace, men gripped steel railings, their knuckles white. Below decks, watertight hatches slammed shut as the crew prepared for the unthinkable. And then another sound. From the depths, the Virginia fired. A heavyweight torpedo surged forward, its trail glowing in the dark like a comet. It wasn't defensive, it was offensive. For the first time in this escalating confrontation, America had sent a weapon directly back toward the Russians. The two torpedoes raced through the abyss, one hunting the Americans, the other hunting the Russians. Above, neither side on the surface knew what was coming. The Hornets and Su-57s still danced a deadly ballet overhead. Russian fast attack craft circled closer, testing the limits of US patience. The Slava-class cruisers' missile hatches remained ominously open, daring the Americans to react, and at the center of it all, the crippled F-35 crawled toward safety, smoke trailing like a beacon across the sky. But in the black, crushing silence of the deep ocean, two weapons of war were closing in on their targets, one that could cripple a US destroyer, and another that could shatter the balance of Russian naval dominance. The clock was ticking. The torpedoes closed the distance with terrifying speed. Sonar operators on both sides could hear it, to metallic predators cutting through the abyss, one hunting American steel, the other Russian. The control rooms were silent except for the rapid-fire reports of distance and closing speed. Target bearing steady. 100 meters, 90. The American sonar operator's voice was taut, every syllable like glass about to shatter. Above the surface, the Roosevelt's escort destroyer heeled sharply, massive screws churning the sea into a frothing storm. It tried to evade. Sailors clung to bulkheads, the deck vibrating with the sheer force of acceleration. But beneath the water, the Russian torpedo was relentless, locked in, unyielding. Then impact. A thunderclap rolled through the depths as the American counter-torpedo struck the Russian Kilo-class submarine square amidships. The explosion was brutal, a detonation that ripped through steel and seawater alike. A violent plume of bubbles shot upward, rocking the surface ships above. Russian sonar went dark instantly, the Kilo was gone. But there was no time to celebrate. The Russian torpedo had not been fooled. It barreled toward the American destroyer, seconds from impact. On the bridge, officers barked orders. Countermeasure systems launched one last desperate decoy. In the sonar room, the operator's voice cracked, 5 seconds. 4-3. The ship jolted as the torpedo detonated, not a direct hit, but close enough. The water erupted against the hull, a wall of force slamming the vessel sideways. Men were thrown from their stations, alarms shrieked, and seawater blasted through vents on the lowest deck. Damage reports poured in, flooding in the forward compartments, power flickering, but astonishingly the ship was still afloat. The clash beneath the waves had ended in fire and steel. One Russian submarine gone, one American destroyer crippled but alive. And yet, above, the battle was far from over. The Su-57s screamed in low, banking hard, their missile pylons heavy with deadly ordnance. From the deck of the Roosevelt, F-A-18s rocketed skyward in a protective arc, streaking contrails across the morning sky. The crippled F-35, its tail a torn ruin, barely managed to link with the escorting Hornets, relying on their cover as Russian fighters moved in for the kill. But then the sea itself split. The Virginia-class submarine that had fired the retaliatory torpedo rose toward periscope depth, its mast piercing the waves like a spear. And with it came something Russia had not anticipated. The launch tubes were ready. What emerged next had the potential to transform the standoff from intimidation into total escalation. The periscope rose, cutting through the waves like a silent sentinel. Deep within the Virginia-class submarine, the fire control officer waited for the captain's command. On the surface, Russian warships scrambled, radars spinning, missile hatches wide, unsure of what would come next. The Americans had shown restraint until now, but restraint has limits. The order came, launch. In an instant, the ocean erupted. From the depths, a Tomahawk missile shot skyward, breaking free of the water in a column of white spray before igniting its booster. It streaked across the horizon at near supersonic speed, low and predatory, hugging the waves as it locked onto its target, the Russian Slava-class cruiser that had threatened the U.S. fleet. Alarms blared aboard the Russian flagship. Crews scrambled to activate countermeasures, launching chaff and flares into the air. But the missile was too fast, too smart. In seconds, it found its mark. The impact was catastrophic. A fireball engulfed the cruiser's forward deck, tearing open its superstructure. Flames roared into the sky as secondary explosions followed, missiles cooking off in their tubes, one by one. The mighty warship became a burning carcass adrift, its power gutted in a single strike. Above, Russian pilots watching from their cockpits froze. The US had just demonstrated that it could destroy the centerpiece of Moscow's naval presence in the Black Sea with a single command. For the Su-57s still circling overhead, the fight was over before it began. Fuel running low, electronic warfare clouding their sensors, and now their fleet's backbone obliterated, they disengaged. One by one, the Russian fighters turned for home. The sea calmed, but only on the surface. Below deck on the American ships, sailors worked furiously to stabilize the damaged destroyer, pumping out seawater, sealing off bulkheads. The Roosevelt's F-A-18s circled protectively overhead, while the wounded F-35 limped back toward friendly skies. And then came the silence, a silence thick with the weight of what had just happened. The message had been sent, loud, unignorable, and absolute. The US Navy hadn't just survived a coordinated Russian assault. It had dismantled it with precision, with discipline, and with overwhelming force. Russia's gamble to test American resolve had ended in humiliation. One submarine lost, one cruiser burning, and an air wing scattered back to base. Washington didn't need to say a word. The wreckage spoke for itself. In the language of naval warfare, it was clear: provoke the US Navy, and the ocean itself will turn into a battlefield you cannot win. And that night, as the fires of the Russian cruiser still flickered against the horizon, every adversary watching from Tehran to Beijing understood the same truth. The United States doesn't start wars, but it will finish them.